Yeah. So I'm actually starting recording. You might see a thing if you're okay with that. You might have to click continue. I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll click continue.
Perfect. Right. Thank you for doing this again. So let's talk about how you got involved with the production of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. And also, could you talk a bit about how you do not have a writing credit for it?
Well, in the first place, people who want to know about me and Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, would probably find all of this information detailed in the memoir that I wrote some years ago, which is called The View from the Bridge, Memories of Star Trek and a Life in Hollywood. It's available in all kinds of venues, hardcover, softcover, Kindle, whatever. Um, but for those of you who haven't or don't plan to read that memoir, a little summation. Um, a friend of mine who was an executive at Paramount suggested that I come in and meet Harv Bennett, who had been assigned to produce the second Star Trek movie after Star Trek the Motion Picture. I had never seen Star Trek really in my life, so I didn't really know what it was, except that I had a sort of glancing memory of channel surfing years earlier and seeing the men with the pointy ears and everybody running around in what looked like, I guess, pajamas. Um, so it didn't mean anything to me, and it never interested me. And in my typical sort of stupid fashion, I probably missed, well, it wasn't probably, I missed everything that was important or worthwhile that the show was trying to do. Um, I went down and met with Harv Bennett, and he was really key for me because I liked him, and I sensed that he liked me. And he showed me the movie, which I had never seen, and I still didn't understand what this was about. Um, and he showed me some of the episodes, and I still didn't understand what it was about. But it did start to remind me of something that I enjoyed very much as a kid. And when I was about, I don't know, 13 or 14, I started reading the novels of C.S. Forester about the English sea captain, Horatio Hornblower, during the Napoleonic Wars. And it's about a ship, it's about a captain, there's a girl in every port, there's lots of adventures. And I thought, well, this Star Trek thing seems to be more or less Captain Hornblower in outer space. It's about destroyers, it's about submarines, whatever the sort of naval equivalent of all that space hardware was. It also reminded me, in addition to the Hornblower novels, and there is, or there was at the time, a Hornblower movie with Gregory Peck, um, a movie that I really have always loved as well, called The Enemy Below. And The Enemy Below, which starred Robert Mitchum and Kurt Jurgens as a dueling destroyer captain and a German U-boat captain. And I thought, okay, this is like The Enemy Below in outer space. This is Hornblower in outer space. So I signed on to direct a movie, the screenplay of which was known as Draft 5, was shortly to come in. And then I went about my business and looked up, and it was 3 or 4 weeks later, and I never got the script. So I asked Harv Bennett, well, where's the script? And he said in so many words, it came in, I don't like it, I can't show it to you. And I said, well, what about draft 4? And he said, kid. He always called me kid because I guess I was a kid. Um, Draft 4, Draft 3, Draft 2, they're unrelated scripts. They're just simply separate attempts to get a second Star Trek movie going. Because whatever you thought of the first one, it made money. And even though it was a runaway production, I think it cost like $45 million in 1979. And this was unheard of. So I said, well, what about letting me read all the drafts? And he said, okay, it's your funeral, or words to that effect. And in those days, you didn't hit send. A van would drive up with a lot of boxes. And I am not the fastest reader in the world. So I plowed through these and eventually asked for a meeting with Harv and his producing partner, Robert Sallin, which was at my house. And I said, I have an idea. Why don't we make a list? And I got a legal pad. And I said, why don't we just make a list of all the things we like in these 5 drafts? Could be a big plot, could be a subplot, could be a sequence, could be a scene, could be a character, could be a line of dialogue. I don't care. Let's just make the list. And then I'll try to cobble together a new script that incorporates as many of these features as possible, and maybe add some of my own miscellaneous thoughts, including, because so much stuff I didn't understand about. I said, how come nobody ever reads a book? And since all I ever do is read books, I thought, well, in the 23rd century, they'll still be reading them. And maybe that's not the case. But anyway, I yanked down the nearest book from my bookshelf, which happened to be A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens, which is, I guess, the only novel that everybody knows the first and last lines of. I said, why can't somebody read a book? Anyway, and they said, well, the only problem with your scheme is that if we don't have a screenplay in 12 days, Industrial Light and Magic, the special effects house, which has been contracted to provide the special effects space shots, says they cannot guarantee delivery in time for the June opening. And I said, what June opening? There's a June opening? And they said, yeah. I said, you booked the movie into theaters and there's no movie? And they said, well, this is how it's always done. And at that point, I didn't know anything because I'd only directed one movie time after time. But, being sort of young and impetuous and kind of jazzed by the idea at this point of doing a space opera, I said, well, I think I can do this in 12 days, but we have to start now. We have to make the list. And they said, we couldn't even make your deal in 12 days. And I said, well, this was my big mistake. Forget my deal. Forget the money. Forget the credit. We're not talking about the directing part. That's already signed, sealed, delivered. But if I don't do this, there's not going to be a movie. And that is how I came to do the script. And, to be fair to me, yes, in 12 days, I cobbled together all these different plots, the Genesis plot, the Kirk meets his son plot, the Khan plot, the whatever else, the Lieutenant Savick plot, and, put them all together like fiddling with a Rubik's Cube. The dialogue for the whole movie, with about 3 or 4 exceptions, is all mine. Harv Bennett contributed a couple of lines. Would you care for a tranquilizer? Captain, this is the garden spot of CD Alpha. I mean, those are the ones I remember, but I'm sure there's a couple others. Otherwise, it's mainly my dialogue and all these other plots jumbled up together as I saw fit in 12 days of which I have no memory. So that's how I came to write it, and that's how come there's no credit.
Why do you think, well, first of all, I want to say your memoir is amazing. I absolutely loved it. And Time
Thank you.
After Time is a fantastic movie. I still go back and watch that. And that series they came out with was an abomination. I don't know if you had any involvement with that at all, but that was horrible.
They wouldn't let me. They wouldn't let me. I was, that's a long, sad Hollywood story, but yes, they didn't want anything to do with me.
Well, it's a good thing you were involved with that because it was an abomination. I'm just like, you know that. Why do you, well, you heard Leo mention how much Star Trek 2 meant to him, and it means a lot to me as well. Why do you think it's still beloved and considered the best of the Star Trek films to this day?
Those are two questions. Artists, and for the purposes of this conversation, I will classify myself as an artist. Artists are certainly not the best judges of their own work, and the word definitive doesn't belong in any discussion, as far as I'm concerned, about art. Movies are like souffles, I think. They either rise or they don't. You can have all the right ingredients, and for whatever reason, it just lies there. For whatever reason, I mean, it's interesting. The other night I sat and showed my youngest daughter Tootsie, which she had improbably never seen. And Tootsie was a movie where everybody did nothing but fight throughout the whole making of the film, particularly Dustin Hoffman and Sidney Pollack, who apparently had very different visions of what movie they were trying to make. None of that is evident in the finished film. It is a souffle that, you know, rockets to the moon. It rises so high. And it did that, I guess, in spite of, or perhaps because of, all that conflict behind the making of it. But, you know, there are movies where there's no conflict behind the making of it, and they do well too. And then there's movies where there's lots of conflict and it becomes a stinker. So, as William Goldman says, nobody knows anything. I am not in any position to judge why Khan has found such a loyal, devoted audience over so many years. And whether it will continue to do so is inevitably an open question. When I was a kid, my dad introduced me to Cyrano de Bergerac, which became my favorite play. And I remember a conversation with him in which I said, "This is a great play." And he said, "Do you really think so?" And I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "Well, do you think in 100 years people will still think it's a great play? Or is it essentially, unlike, for example, Hamlet, a play with only one character, Cyrano, and everybody else is more or less feeding him cues?" Time is the ultimate arbiter of these things. It separates the artistic wheat from the chaff. People still seem to love Cyrano, and me too. And I was reminded that when Kissinger and Nixon went to China, what was that, 73, and Kissinger got into a conversation with Zhou Enlai, and the subject of the French Revolution came up. And Kissinger said to Zhou, what do you think of the French Revolution? And Zhou Enlai said, "Too early to tell." And when you think of art in those terms, great art seems to really endure. People still do productions of Oedipus. It's a great play. Hamlet is a great play. Shakespeare, by and large, the really good ones, they don't date. Tootsie is more, it's more fun watching Tootsie now after the Me Too movement than probably when it came out. It has acquired different levels of resonance. And perhaps that can be said about The Wrath of Khan as well. I don't know. I am not the judge. Artists are people who put messages in bottles. And they throw the bottle out into the wide world and hope that somebody will find the bottle and pop the cork and be able to decipher what you stuck inside. But chances are you're not going to be around when they're doing it to look over their shoulder and say, no, that's not gum, that's gun, or otherwise interpret it. It ceases to be your property as an artist when it's finished. And so I join the crowd of speculators who love it. I love it. It gets to me. I'm not a very analytical person, so I'm not very good at too much going beyond that, I think.
Okay, no, that's a fantastic answer, actually. Thank you. So you said, I'm not going to get involved with Star Trek again, and yet you ended up being one of the writers for Star Trek 4. How did that come about?
I was the main writer for Star Trek 4.
Exactly.
Let's not kid around.
Exactly. How did that happen?
It happened because two writers were hired to write the Star Trek 4 movie. And again, this is my understanding because I wasn't around for any of this. They wrote a big role in the movie. The story was a story cooked up by Leonard Nimoy and Harv Bennett, a story about the whales. And the writers wrote a big part in it for Eddie Murphy, who was Paramount's other big star. And I never read the script, so I don't know. I just heard this. And I heard it from Ned Tannen, who was at that time running Paramount Pictures and was a friend of mine from way back. He was the one who made the 7% solution when he was at Universal. And he said, we're not going to take our two most valuable assets, Eddie Murphy and Star Trek, and put them in one movie. So let's start over. And at that point, they had something like 6 weeks before they were supposed to start production. I got a phone call from my friend Dawn Steele, who was then head of production at Paramount, saying, Nikki, come in here right away. We have a problem. And so these were all my friends. Ned and Dawn and Harv, for that matter, are no longer alive. But I went in and I said, what's going on? And they said, well, we want to start over. We like Harv and Leonard's story, but we need a new script and we need it tomorrow. And I said, well, what's the story? She said, go ask them. So I trudged across the lot and sat, and Harv and Leonard spieled me the story. And I said, should I read the script? And they said, no, please don't. It'll only confuse you and set you on it. Just stick to this, what we just said. And Harv said, let's divide it up. I'll write the stuff in outer space, and you write the stuff in San Francisco. And I said, they're going to San Francisco? Didn't I just do this with Time After Time? It's the same movie. Can't they go to Paris? Why can't we go to Paris? And they said, no, they couldn't go to Paris because the whales wouldn't fit in the Seine or something. Dumb. Anyway, it became a kind of a rehash of Time After Time, except they come from the future instead of from the past. but it's still a sort of a scavenger hunt movie. And I actually got to recycle things that I had cut out of time after time and stick them in this, which goes to show you as a writer, you should never throw anything away. And that's how I became involved with it.
It's another great film. My daughter and I actually watched Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country last night. And I joked with her, I said it actually should have been called The Apology because Star Trek V was so bad. But I digress. And actually, I was amazed how resonant it is with today, to this date. It's like a timeless film. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the making of Star Trek VI.
Well, Paramount was not happy with the idea that Star Trek V was going to be the last movie with the original cast. And I think, I can't remember, somebody, it wasn't Harv because he wasn't at the studio anymore, but somebody said, do you have any ideas for another Star Trek movie? And I said, no, because mainly I never get ideas. And then some months later, I was on Cape Cod having my 2-week holiday, and Leonard Nimoy was in Boston, and he took the little puddle jumper and came to the Cape, and we spent a day walking up and down the beach and trying to come up with a story. And Leonard said a couple of things that were interesting, if not news to me. Maybe science fiction always is reflecting what's going on at the time it's created. Maybe all art, by the way, is reflective of the time and circumstances under which it's made. And the wall had just come down in Berlin. And as Leonard explained to me, the Klingons have always been our stand-ins for the Russians. I went, oh. So he said, what happens if the wall comes down in outer space? What happens to those people in the Starfleet if they have no function anymore? Who am I if I have no enemy to define me? And then I started thinking about Chernobyl. And I said, okay, what if there's a Chernobyl in outer space and the Klingon Empire becomes, for all intents and purposes, uninhabitable, and there's going to be a mass migration? I mean, who knew the migration would be as big as it's finally become globally? But we were sort of accidentally ahead of the curve. And I cooked up this thing with Leonard walking up and down the beach. And later I co-wrote it with the man who started off as my assistant. His name is Denny Martin Flynn. He was a remarkable guy. He's not alive. But we wrote it together. And it was pretty easy. We were watching the Soviet Union collapse. And we actually, this is the weirdest part, we wrote the assassination of Gorbachev, whom we called Gorkon, before the coup d'etat in the Soviet Union happened. We predicted it. He didn't die, thank God, but we basically predicted that a coup was coming. We filmed it. We were in the editing room when the coup did occur. There are things about the movie that I have to say I find troubling to me. One is that there is a torture scene. There's a waterboarding scene in the movie. And it's Spock who's doing the waterboarding. And today I find that uncomfortable to watch. I guess it was even meant to be uncomfortable then, but we didn't know about all that waterboarding stuff when we did it, and now it puts a funny taste in my mouth. The other thing is, I think the movie, and again, this is just one opinion. It's not definitive. I just put the bottle together. I can't tell other people what it means. But I find the movie faintly smug that Kirk is actually prophetic. He says, some people think we've reached the end of history. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, a lot of people did think we've reached the end of history. The Harvard philosopher Francis Fukuyama said, is this the end of history? But we all assumed that things were going to be better, that we were heading into a brave new world. Well, we were heading into a new world, all right, but it was, as terrible, if not more so, than anything has come before. We're in graver danger of annihilation from a dozen different directions, whether you want to talk about the virus, whether you want to talk about the bomb, whether you want to talk about climate change, than we've ever been. And so looking back at the movie now from this vantage point seems a bit smug or a bit naive to me.
Well, I have to say that the scene that you mentioned, specifically the waterboarding scene, still comes across as uncomfortable, but that was what you were trying to go for at that time. And there really was no other way to get that information out of her. So I understand why you had to do what you had to do, but yeah.
Ouch.
Right. Uh, um, so one of the things that I just want to verify this with you. The disclaimers we all see on DVDs are the result of what you said on Star Trek II DVD. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't know if it's formally designated as the Nicholas Meyer clause, but there are a couple of useful things I did in my life. One of them is my television movie, The Day After, which for whatever reason remains the most watched movie ever made for television. And the other thing was that clause. And that came about because in the heyday of DVDs, they put a lot of interviews and extras on the discs. So I was interviewed for Star Trek II, and I told the story of the creating of the screenplay, more or less exactly as I told it to you just now. And my friend Lynn O'Leary, who was in charge of DVDs at Paramount, called me up and said, according to the Paramount lawyers, we can't use any of your story. And I said, why not? And they said, because Paramount doesn't want to get in trouble with the Writers Guild for revealing the circumstances of how the screenplay was written and that you weren't paid and didn't get credit and so on. And I was sort of incensed by this. And I said to her, well, why don't you just take me out of the whole documentary thing? Just remove me. Because if I can't tell what really happened, then I don't want to do it. I don't want to just do some kind of puff piece. And she said, to her eternal credit, that's what I hoped you would say. Now I've got some ammo. So she went back, and the lawyers figured out this little clause, namely that the opinions expressed in this documentary or these segments are not necessarily those of fill in the blank. Paramount, 20th Century Fox, Universal, Warner Brothers, MGM, doesn't matter. It got them off the hook. And what it enabled was for those interviews to cease being puff pieces and becoming a form of oral history where people could say their version of events And other people may take issue with my version of the events. But Paramount and these other studios would not legally be on the hook. So you could have a conversation, you could have a dialogue, you could have oral history. And that's how that came to be.
And I love that. Walk me through what it's like to wear a director hat, because I'm a writer myself, and I know about, you know, putting stuff on the page. And I love the writing that you've done, and I've loved the directing you've done, but I have no concept of wearing that director's hat. Could you sort of walk me through the differences?
Well, okay, this is a big question. With very few exceptions, I mean, maybe if you're in television, it is an exception. It is not an exception. Writing is a solitary activity. When I write, I'm by myself. It's just me. And I am only sort of bounded by either the limits of the assignment or the limits of my ability, what we'll call talent. It's sort of lonely, and you wonder if anybody is paying attention, or does it matter? I guess it matters more if you have an assignment, but if you're writing on spec, it's like, you know, who really cares about this? Making a movie as a director or anybody on the set, you're part of a collegial activity. It's a group activity. It's a team effort. In order to be part of a team effort, it seems to me, you have to like people. You have to like working with them. You have to be able to work with them. You have to deal with temperaments, with insecurities, with egos. And you have to deal with the fact that it's nonstop. Once the train leaves the station, once the rocket is heading for Mars, there's no going back for the salt. Everything has to be with you. You have to be healthy. You have to have the hide of a rhinoceros. You have to withstand incredibly long days. When I'm writing and I get blocked or I need inspiration, I go take a nap. There's no naps in, you know, directing unless you sort of build it into the schedule, which I do. I would always work up a really tricky shot before lunch, really tricky, so that after lunch it would take them another hour or something to light it, figure it out. Then I'd get in my nap. But otherwise, you have to be incredibly strong. You have to withstand not only the pressures that I've mentioned, but others I haven't. What is the weather like? What's the studio like? Who's writing the checks? Are they bouncing or are they going through? So it is the first requisite for a movie director is physical strength. If you haven't got that, don't try this. And as I say, it is a group activity. When I'm finished directing a movie, and I haven't directed in a very long time, which is another story, I'm sort of partied out. I've seen enough. I like people and I like interacting with them, but there comes a time when I just want to go home and be by myself. Conversely, when I finish writing a screenplay, I have cabin fever and I really want to interact with other people. And I guess everybody now knows what cabin fever feels like because we've all got it. I suffer from it less because it's the way I live. But for a lot of people, I mean, the worst torture you can do to somebody is not waterboarding them, but isolating them. And as I say, you get finished with a screenplay, you get finished with a novel, you're ready to go back to the party.
That is a fantastic answer. Thank you. Um, I know you were hired, and you probably can't talk much about this, but I have to ask this because when I heard you were hired for Star Trek Discovery, I was like, yes, this is so fantastic. And then I don't know what happened. And I don't think anybody does, except you, obviously. And there were even rumors that you might be working on a con series or another series. And I'm just wondering, what can you talk about in terms of that? Because I know myself and others were super excited to see you were involved.
Well, the short answer is I don't know what happened. The slightly longer answer is that I did write I was commissioned to write a 3-episode sort of trilogy about Khan, which I did. And so far, as I know, nothing has ever been done with it.
I would love to see that. Jeez. If I can somehow poke the hornet's nest for you, I'll see what I can do because I'd love to see that. My last question to you is, what does the future hold for you?
In what sense?
Well, in terms of writing, are you going to hop on the director's chair again? What does it hold?
Well, at the moment, it's very uncertain what the future holds for any of us. I'm hoping to live through this thing by being careful. I am writing another Sherlock Holmes novel now to follow up with last year's The Adventure of the Peculiar Protocols. And so I'm writing another novel. I've finished writing a large action film, and I finished revisions on it. Whether that movie will get made is anybody's guess. I'm working on another screenplay that I was hired to write, and now I'm doing a rewrite job on it. I'm doubtful, just to clear up sort of a question you haven't quite asked. I stopped directing in the 90s following the death of my wife. After her death, she was 36 years old, and she died of breast cancer. And I had 2 daughters. I still have them, 3 and 6. And it just wasn't possible for me to continue directing and also be a mom to these children, 3 and 6. And I don't think I would have believed anybody if someone had said to me, be real, your directing career is over. That was information I don't think I was prepared to hear. But I did wind up finding it out. I had to raise them. I'm happy to say they are delightful little girls. They're not so little anymore. One of them is a successful screenwriter. The other is a restaurateur and also writes. So I guess it all worked out for the best. But I don't know if I'm about to direct a movie.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that, and but I'm glad that everything seems to have worked out. And wow, I'm sorry, I'm emotional here at the moment. I'm so sorry, but thank you for telling me that. I am curious. Day After was amazing. Why am I not able to get it to see again? It seems like it's not available for streaming, and I think
I'm willing to bet you it's on Amazon.
I'll have to take a look because I did a while back.
I mean, when I say on Amazon, I don't mean on Amazon to stream. I mean,
Right.
if you go on Amazon online and order the movie, you'll get it.
Okay,
There's a Blu-ray of it for sure.
Well, good, because I think now more than ever, this is something that should be seen by another generation of folks. So it should be available beyond just that. So
Thank you.
yeah. Well, Oh, boy, this has just been such an honor to talk to you. I'm going to stop the recording. So
Okay.
give me a second.